Hello, everyone, and welcome to the All Stats No Res podcast, the premier podcast for the Dominions 5 multiplayer community. Today we're on episode 6. As always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Articulatimus, aka Charlie. With me today is HP Munchcraft, Sauron, Rovsier, and Darkwolf. How you guys doing today, before we get into anything?
Doing pretty good. I've been better, I've been worse.
I've been pretty good. Just got back from a wedding.
I've had a pretty busy weekend, but it's been a good weekend. So coming into Monday, doing all right.
Nice. Darkwolf is a little preoccupied right now, but he'll be joining us shortly. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about indies or independence. But before we get into that, we also want to start with some clarifications over last episode where we were talking about Dominion's 6 rumors. So we had some comments on our YouTube video or on our podcast, so we want to address those.
When we put our last podcast up, JSOH or Jaso or Josh, however it's pronounced, who is one of the playtesters, just had some clarifying comments for us, and we want to go ahead and share them with you. So what he said was that trees are not on the combat map, but bushes, shrub, rocks, and mushrooms are, and we know from Maryland that sometimes the mushrooms will explode into poison clouds and kill your expansion, which is very funny. They can also light on fire or break up formations, so the terrain does matter. He also brought up that multiple holy points is basically just giant units, but Ziadans are 3 holy points, so Rip and Pip to Heat Raga. Yeah. He also mentioned the cave layer is made on map creation, and it is pretty variable. You can have as many or as few caves as you want. Then after that, he clarified the adding 1 PD into every province you take is when they are populated provinces. If you have 0 population, you will still get 0 PD in the new one. Unfortunately. Very sad. Yeah, it does make sense. So he also clarified that mages are going to cost more in addition to infrastructure costing more, so that's designed to be a more troop-focused meta. We'll see if it is or not. He said that army wipes in general are higher research with high AoE but non-battlefield wide versions at earlier research where our current army wipes would be. And then he said the biggest quality of life change for him is that you can use path hotkeys to filter the forging menu. So you can now filter your forging menu by air items or earth items and no longer have to look through every single trinket and G-Jaw before you start forging things. And then he also concluded finally with saying there is at least one Finn in the beta. That is Naxu or Nasku. Forget what order that goes in, who is also on the Ruby server, I believe the admin or an admin of Snek.earth, which is the Discord bot they use to run their games. But although they are Finnish, we do not know if they are an actual looter or not.
Asking the important questions.
Exactly.
So, are they truly aggressive?
We've come a long way from Dominions 1, haven't we? There's a lot of streamlining, a lot of new features.
Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe. We'll see, yeah. It remains to be seen, but eventually we'll be known as the Dominion 6 Premier Multiplayer Podcast.
Yeah.
So going on to our actual topic for this week, we are talking about a major function of the game, which is independence. A major part of the game, I should say. Brings a lot of flavor, a lot of interesting diversification of what you can do. And we're going to start by just kind of going down and talking about the concept, also specific indies, use cases for them. We're going to start with the standard humans.
I do want to jump in and clarify. When we're talking about indies, we are talking about when you recruit indies. We're not talking about which types you expand into or don't. That would be a different topic. But we're talking about when you want to go to your unforted provinces and recruit the little red pants mans into your armies.
Yes, using indies.
Using indies.
Indie using
groups.
Indies, not fighting into indies.
Recruit indies. Be like the AI. Loot people's capital with woodsmen. Who cares?
Hell yeah. Paul.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So normally, a lot of players in the Dominions community kind of swear off of indies outside of very rare cases, and I think some of us here actually recruit indies, which is controversial to most players. So you might hear some hot takes here, and they shouldn't be, and that's why we're going to go over them.
I make a general statement at the beginning here.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So I may end up being a bit of a dissenting opinion on this one, since I tend not to use independence very often. But to me, it would seem that more often than not, what you're going to end up using in D4 and when it's going to be most appropriate is when it fulfills a niche that your nation otherwise doesn't have access to. Because in most situations, if they're for the same purpose, national troops tend to be a bit more efficient for whatever job you're using them for.
Well,
Well,
we'll see.
I mean,
that's where we're going to disagree,
Alright.
and I'm here to flame you, so don't worry.
So
I mean, does anybody actually really just build indies indiscriminately? I mean, typically
No.
you are intentionally building them.
Yeah.
You want something out of them, right? So I don't think that's like any kind of controversial take or anything like that. I think if one were to
Sauron
recruit indies,
disagrees.
we'll get to it, Charlie.
I'll go into it more than just like
Right.
outright statements, but let's actually hit on all of them because it'll be a little bit to get through there.
sure.
First type of indies is our normal, that we're going to talk about, is all the various different types of barely distinguishable humans on the map. We're talking about a red pants militia. We're talking about our cavalry and slingers and hoplites and all the normal dudes. Obviously, you recruit the scout when you need a scout. You recruit the commander when you need a commander, and the priest when you need a priest. But what about the fucking troops when you recruit those?
I think, honestly, there might be some tech in the expansion phase if you have enough gold where you could make parties to take really easy provinces. I haven't tested this, but I've always kind of thought about this. In actual games, I think the most useful ones are going to be your archers and militia. And some people like making heavy cav if you have really bad nationals, like if you're playing something like LA Satis or like anyone who has like very, very bad nationals.
So,
Can I posit the light infantry with Jav? Which
Yeah,
I
you
agree
can
with
throw
that
him.
one, actually. I'm in favor of that as well.
no, so
Very uncommon, but
I want to agree with the very first thing Sauron said, but disagree with the rest of it, because I think that if you're in the expansion phase, I'm not talking about making pure indie parties, but in the expansion phase, a lot of times you'll get an army, especially if your scale's expanding, that is like your expansion party is running out of steam, and so sometimes it's worth it to just sit there when you have indies that you can get for very low res and recruitment points. Just like, okay, sit there with your army, grab up those like bear tribe or those red pants light infantry, and just have enough dudes for that expansion party to keep going, instead of having to go all the way back to the cap and consolidating, or like rolling the dice on some knife edge play and then risking just losing the party entirely. So I want to agree with that. But I think indie heavy cav are almost never worth it, and indie light infantry are very bad.
I think
What makes the light infantry really bad? Because they're stock standard baseline like troops essentially, but they get a shield, helmet, and javelin.
They do.
That's the one I'm talking about specifically.
Right. So they do get a shield, helmet, and javelin. I just think they are. If you look at national troops, you've got to go pretty bad into the like lower tiers of nations before you find one with like worse value than the indie light infantry. Basically, I think they should be 8 gold, and paying 10 for them is overpaying. Now, don't let that stop you if you really need the troops, but I would not personally buy them when you have a lot of other things.
I think they're better
spend
than
the money on.
The gold is based on the chassis and the stats, which are just basic human stats. So
Yeah, I know.
what would you compare that to with other indies that you would make? Like, why is light infantry stand out to you as something worse?
I wasn't comparing it necessarily to other indies.
Okay,
I was comparing it to like nationals. Like if you get that lineup for 8 gold in a lot of nations, basically. Like let's say Man has the like this is a slightly different lineup. They have the Logrian Slinger who has an axe, so you get a reasonable guy for 9, whereas the Indy Light Infantry stays 10 because, as you said, it's chassis costed, and I just think they're compared to Nationals and even some other indies. I just think they are not value for money.
I personally wouldn't use them as. You want to go first? I'll let you, because you were
can
trying
go
to
first. You can go first on. You might end up saying the same thing.
I think using them like the Logrian Slinger is kind of disingenuous because it's kind of like a national feature of Mans who have this quality unit that's out of fort recruitment, who has decent stats, and he's cheaper priced. So comparing him is like it's a one-off case, right? So even though I agree with you that it is the Slinger is better than a lot of times the light infantry, and why would you make the Slinger over light infantry as man? Like it's not the same thing. Really, you're focusing if you're making this unit on like you're playing like Machaca, and you want like an infantry corps that isn't your high tier. So you're gonna substitute your mid tier, which is not what a lot of Dominions players do, by making indies. And they have their uses, and people just don't know how to loot. So
True.
It's its own issue. Like heavy infantry, if we want to switch from light infantry, are a solid raider with like for nations. And people don't make them, even though he's available all the time. You can make 10 of them or 15 of them and run at 6 PD and probably win.
Right. I do.
So if I might get in my point on light infantry as well.
Sure.
All right.
I think there's a definite use case for them in reinforcing expansion parties that puts them significantly ahead of other independents. Because if you look at their resource cost, it exists in a sweet spot kind of in between militia and heavy infantry. So you can actually produce somewhat decent numbers of them out of fort, particularly in the middle and late age. And then you can use them to reinforce expansion parties, and they're not going to, HP route you like militia will, and you can actually get a decent number unlike heavy infantry.
That is fair.
Also, I like that I can mix them with my other javelin troops, keep them on fire, and it will not mess up the scripting. Like it's just used to hold up the initial.
Yeah, the javelin's quite useful in expansion as well.
Right.
That is also true, but I find they fit another unsweet spot where they're too many resources to be generally massable, but too low prot to be generally protected.
I actually agree with HP because I think they suffer from the issue that their gold spent during expansion on something that has no viability post expansion.
Oh, that's untrue.
Which is a very niche case, and you may say, "Oh, it's a troop, whatever." But generally speaking, your national troops will usually be better than the light infantry at what the light infantry do for the same gold price, because gold scales with skill rather than indies being extra cheap. So what'll end up occurring is you'll spend a bunch of gold on them, and maybe you'll have another 2 provinces expansion. But your opponents and the people who will be bumping into these armies will have more effective forces because they'll be reinforced with stuff like sacreds, or they'll have more forts. It's a very
I disagree with that. Always take the extra province. Fuck it. Just take more provinces in expansion.
I would say that too. Like people try to do this thing where you force borders, or they'll try to donut you. One, don't let any player donut you if you're a Dominions player. If you let that shit fly, you're part of the problem. Two, if you overextend and someone wants that land, you can. Hey, I hate Diplo, but use Diplo and get some money out of it.
I know I'm skipping around a lot, but I really do want to go back into the heavy infantry for just a second. That what people don't realize when they talk about only certain troops are good, you only make this troop. It's like a commander in 20 heavy infantry is 240 gold, right? And it'll take your 6 PD just as good as your fucking Sacred Elf Cav, right? Now you have vans, right? You have 5 vans and a commander. That's 350 gold for the vans and 120 gold minimum for the commander. So you're looking at nearly 500 gold, half the gold to raid provinces if all you're doing is taking PD with the heavy infantry as compared to doing your so-called good at raiding elf sacred, where it's no, those shouldn't be raiding. They're not really efficient at it. Maybe if you have nothing else to raid with, sure, but Just think a little bit about what you're using your gold on.
No,
Look at
I
your
definitely
troops.
agree with that. And for me, like independence as a general, including the normal human variants, they're just a way to fine tune your toolbox. Because
Yeah.
you don't want to overcommit resources to something that something cheaper could accomplish as well. So in that sense, so no, I agree with that.
And
That's why I like indies, because they allow you to actually do that.
I also want to explain a comment I made earlier and left hanging. The reason I think that indie cataphracts and heavy cavalry and things are almost never worth making is that they cost like resources and recruitment points that are on par or more than like good national cavalry.
That's
So
true.
you really can't get them out of non-forted provinces. And then if you've got a fort province and you're recruiting indie heavy cav, there's only a very few situations in which that's going to be like correct.
What, you don't want to make one heavy cav every 3 turns?
You want me to give my intake? So
All right, yeah,
I think,
go for it.
There's different play styles where you could, make use of the cavalry. I think like knights at the higher end of the indie heavy cav are, they're standard knights, and if you give them buffs, it's probably not too bad. So, you're fluffing a knight with protection or quickness is nothing to sneeze at.
Sure.
And yes, they do take a while to make the heavy cav, but if you have bigger provinces that have the resources and you can make 1 or 2 a turn, it might be worth it. I think it really depends per situation. And then there's another argument if you're fort spamming, which is very uncommon. But you might do at certain nations.
Many such cases. Jesus.
Like if you have your forts next to each other, you making like 2 or 3 out of that fort is probably not taking away if like that option if your forts are all really close together. You're still making 9 across a bunch of forts, like 9 troops that are national or whatever. So it's probably fine in those cases, in my opinion. We should probably. I know I'm talking a little bit here, but the general use case for indies and the humans, if you don't want to like take our stances on like whether you should use these guys in cases, which I think you should, but I'm biased. Slingers and militia are probably the 2 ones you really want to incorporate into your play for siege strength and patrolling, because they have high patrol values for low gold. So that's something you unironically should be doing, as it's good bang for your buck. And at worst, denying scouting information is a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that one's basically non-controversial.
Yeah.
Yes, I think everybody agrees with that. In
What?
fact, it's probably the most common use of independent militia.
Well, some people don't do it. I've had conversations with players who are like, "Why would you do that? That's a waste of time. Why would I do that when I can just diplo my neighbors?" Like,
Well, what they might end up doing is they might end up using them for siege chaff, or they might end up using them to help with blood hunt patrolling, even outside of.
well, that's
generic
who you would
patrol.
blood hunt with. Yeah, you would
Yeah,
use
exactly.
militia to generally blood hunt, and it'll be cheaper sometimes than your national. So militia, red pants man does have a place.
Red
That's
Pants
what I
Man
did on
does
Midgard.
have-
Midgard until I got Watchers.
What was that?
Yeah, especially elves. They're very
Yeah,
useful. for
patrolling.
siege and
In our invite only. That's what I patrolled with, militia, before I summoned Watchers.
I see. Yes.
All right, is there anything more you guys want to add with humans? We didn't really touch on hot
Absolutely.
plates.
We have not done the meta's absolute favorite indie recruit, but not my favorite indie recruit, the fucking independent crossbow man.
Crossbow man!
Oh, look, he's got an AP attack. He takes away 60% of your armor.
That's funny that I almost forgot.
Well costed though, right?
Actually, you
depends.
didn't even write that one down, Sauron.
Yeah,
Completely slipped your mind. Guess we know which one Sauron's making.
Like there is the what 4 or 7 resource crossbowmen that makes everyone
80?
coom. Like
It's
a good
7.
one.
yeah,
It's 7.
seven resource
7.
crossbowmen. You can get 1,000,000 of them in the late age, and you can run around with your 300 crossbowmen stack, cosplaying like
that's
the
the-
Napoleonic age.
That's the useful one right there, HP.
And then you got
And then
the
you have
armored
the
varieties that everyone
less
hates that
useful
cost
ones.
22 resources, and they fucking cannot mass worth a damn, and everyone hates them and thinks they suck.
All right. You want me to comment on crossbows? Or you
Go
guys
for
want
it.
Go for it.
Okay, so I think crossbows, although popular, they're a nice HP anchor, but any archer really can do this role. Sometimes having an HP anchor in bigger fights has its uses, as the fighting will happen in the center, and it'll be pretty close, but you don't want an HP route. So having someone who sits back there with your mages can be beneficial and allow you to win certain fights. But in general, I think there's a lot of counters to crossbowmen. I don't know if I've said it before, but you can use line formation, both of the battlefield-wide air spells, Mist and Storm. Combined in particular is disgusting, makes them absolutely a waste of gold. Although they have the uses, there's a ton of counters to crossbows. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I also think they're overrated. I don't think they're bad per se, because it is still an AP attack on a guy. But they're one of those cases where, like, with previous NDs, it's like, if your opponent is going to die to crossbows, you can, like, look at that and be like, huh, this guy's in a giant block and he has no armor. He's going to die to crossbows, and then start recruiting him. But, like, for the most part, people treat them as, like, a mainline troop that you should just, like, have giant armies of indie crossbowmen, and I think that's pretty garbage, and it's generally very easy to counter.
They're good. People just overcommit to them. Is that the general consensus?
I think so.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think players should use crossbows. If they have that much for crossbows, they should have the same love for like longbows, because those actually, the longbowmen have a sword. I believe the ones from Man are almost identical to the indie one. And a lot of people like Man's longbowmen, but you don't see them. So it's kind of interesting.
Do indie crossbows not have a sword? Do they have a mace or
something? No, they do have a sword. I thought they did. I'm pretty sure they have a sword, but maybe I'm wrong. HP, you can correct me in the editing.
Crossbowman. Short sword.
Dagger. No, the longbowman. Well, you're looking for the longbow.
So while we're on archers, before even without the longbowman,
yes, they have a short sword.
I do want to bring attention to the indie 4-resource shitbow, just regular human, because
he's great.
Like, that is, it's not like a mainline troop. I'm not saying make armies of 500 of these unless your enemy dies to that. But when you want massed arrow fire, you want low resources, and getting them out of forts is amazing. So if your enemy does have something vulnerable to archers, that one is a good one. And if your enemy doesn't have something vulnerable to archers, it is very fucking easy to just get bait out of the indie province. Have 3 dudes on fucking fire and keep distance at the front of your army to just reel people in or eat evocations with the rest of your army out of range. Like, that's a good one. Like, I have noticed that those guys are surprisingly useful, given how, like, actually shit their chassis is.
Independent
don't have the
is even
indiscipline
better for that tactic.
What?
All right, both of you. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say independent slingers can be used for that as well.
Yes.
And just as another addendum, all ranged units are pretty good at eventually sniping mages that aren't protected against ranged units. So keep that in mind.
Yes. If your enemy has a bunch of mages in a block and they are casting Communion Master first round instead
block
of...
or no block HP.
Right.
Instead of... If you get 1 or 2, it can still be worth it.
If they're casting Communion Master instead of a self-buff to protect themselves, then slap out those shitty indie ranged units, slap them straight in the front, and have them snipe some mages. It is always worth it and always funny.
Well, that probably ties into actually scouting. You were trying to talk before, Charlie?
No, I think I just made a comment.
Okay. I think the last one that's worth mentioning is probably the indie elephant. Yes. I think there's some specific cases you might use this. Maybe if you have N2. You could argue you could use them with N1, but that would use nature gems. There is a weird... This might be my controversial opinion. I think that there's a critical mass point with tramplers and dominions that can be kind of scary, but massing tramplers like elephants is super gold heavy. Although it can be quite powerful, there's a lot of negatives that can come with using mass elephants, as they have like 9 morale, beastal mastery, and
very low.
I wouldn't mass elephants more than like 5 or 6 of them, but I will say that, like, 5 or 6 of them, 500 or 600 gold, that's the cost of a fort. But if you put body ethereal on elephants, like body ethereal quickness, if you're a nation that can pull that off or something. Then...
Well, you need Rage of the Corn Rat, or else they're gonna run
true.
away.
But anyone can get N1, right? Like,
well, it's an N2 spell, so you need the
use
gem. That's why I said Berserk.
Rat Rage. You can also use the one that doesn't just target animals. The other one.
You're talking about Touch of Man. Well, if it'll go off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's like some interesting tech you could do. You could put it on like the side of your wings, and you could have tramplers attempt to run into someone's backline.
I think it's if you have the point buffs to make them good, it is trample damage, which is a viable kill mechanism. So I think that they're always something to keep in mind. And although we're not really talking about PD, like Elephant PD is a great one to PD dump and just like roll somebody completely accidentally when they when their raiders don't expect it, you know.
I guess we'll get into this point later when we talk about some of the cave recruits, particularly Troglodytes. But you do need trample versus high defense stuff. So if you're unsure sometimes how to kill like a defense stack duck, generally trampling it will be the answer. And sometimes, I think in rare cases, you won't have like earth elementals or air elementals or ice elementals to trample such a thug. But you could use elephants in theory to either kill it or knock it off the field.
Yeah.
Very true.
Alright, I think that's it for normal dudes.
Let's move on to our cave recruits.
Pog?
Some interesting characters in the lineup here.
We're about to have a whole...
I think I'll start by asking, why are Cynos busted?
Are we trying to get them nerfed here? Like,
Illwinter likes furries, that's why.
Okay, I don't know if this will have some negatives, us pointing this out, but yes, the Cynos, when introduced, for whatever reason, they have some of the best rec and res costs in Dominions, or despite for the 15 gold, they're absolutely nutty. So if you somehow get them, they are absolutely a nasty raider.
So to put it into perspective, they have the like Deer Tribe resource and rec cost. There's like 4 rec and 2 to 4 res, I believe, and 15 gold. And the thing is, like ogre sized with 2 attacks and a javelin on each one. The hunter having a spear and the other guy having a knife and a bow. And they each have a bite attack, and it's for 15 gold.
And they and
dark vision.
Yeah, and dark vision, yes, but undis, which is their downside.
True.
Which doesn't matter though if you're raiding.
So these
like a 50.
Yeah, these guys are raiders extraordinaire because you can just you can dump gold very efficiently into getting them because of their like high velocity, and then they're pretty good, so you don't need all that many of them. Like you maybe need 15 of them to raid enemy PD, and you can get that in like a turn or two, and then put it on their Cyno leader or just a regular indie commander. And then just in a couple of turns, whenever you want it, just have a raid squad. Very expendable and takes PD as long as you want it to. I will put in, though, that these guys are not busted because I've seen people like who think they're so hot and like massing them, and then they start to really suck ass when they're like in an army.
I would probably say they're busted, honestly, but yeah. They're for their gold cons.
They're
in an army. They're gonna start getting hit by stuff that they're not in melee range to deal with, and then they're gonna start not liking it.
Well, you shouldn't be putting them in your armies. I think they're most disgusting as a raider.
I do want to caution you when saying busted. They're very good for their role, but they're not like so busted you want to just be mindlessly recruiting them or like build a fort so you can recruit more of them. No, they're good because with no fort you can just grab a raiding party in like a couple of turns.
Pop out too fast.
Speaking of raiding, they can also do that.
Yes,
I mean they're a berserker, right?
Yes, they're a berserker.
They have the pillage bonus as well.
If you can buff them, I don't see how they're not good. But I feel like a lot of people like mindlessly mash stuff and kind of blob it. people, and yeah, if you have a bunch of undisciplined
if you build a rage cage, they're good, and you could also do some nasty things with the hunters because they have a short bow where they stand still and fire, and you just buff the crap out of them and have Touch of Madness in your last buff slot and send them in. But that's a little.
They're cheaper gold, notably the short bows. I believe the hunters are 15, and the bows are either 13 or.
But they do. They
I know
do
they're
have
less
like
gold.
a knife as their second attack, which is like kind of sad.
Still two attacks.
It's a stone dagger too. It's only 16.
Dagger and bite. I mean,
Sorry, hold on. It's only 15 damage.
I think it's underrated tech to fluff archers, but I think it's quite powerful. Normally, this will be a little off topic, but like
You're not.
buffing, like,
You're preaching to the choir with Rob in the call about them samurai archers.
They're pretty good, actually. There are some pretty solid archer chassis.
Can you go one episode without referencing Joman?
No, I did it. I did it for too.
Well, listen,
if I would like to bring up another one, have you heard of the Bandar archers?
Hey,
They got those. They got armor. They hit pretty hard.
Speaking of weeb shit, how about that fucking cave province that lets you just fucking recruit the little tiny Ko-Oni like it's Dominion's 4?
Pretty good.
Megapog.
I haven't used them too much, honestly, which is kind of weird because they're kind of an uncommon one unless you're playing an EA. You get the demon freeze with them.
Sorry about that. What were we talking about?
Fuck off, Darkwolf.
Darkwolf?
Darkwolf,
you should unironically edit that out.
Segue. Holy shit. Right? Ko-Oni. The recruitables, Ko-Oni. Okay? The indie recruits, Ko-Oni with the chaos power. Those things are...
Is Ko-Oni with a K?
Yes. Those things are amazing with the exception that, like, generally you're not taking enough chaos power to make them live up to their potential, and if you're taking order, they get very sad very fast. If you actually have chaos and you find a Ko-Oni province, yes, it's 14 gold for a size 1, yes, or like something like that, yes, it is 1,000,000 gold per square, but they have 2 forms, they will chaos power up to insane beatdowns, and they will kick ass, and you can buff them. They basically rule.
It's just kind of sad to me that there's just... for one thing, you're not going to come across that many cave provinces. I mean, that's map dependent, obviously, but the other part is like, there's so many interesting variety that you can get. So it's so hard to like find something that's like that you want for your given situation. So, but yeah, in that particular niche situation, yeah, you could make use of them, right?
I believe Sauron wanted to make a comment about Ko-Oni as well.
I was mostly saying that I haven't really used them too much. I'm kind of... I don't know if I agree with you, HB, on their uses. Because if you're recruiting them and you have Turmoil, you're using them defensively? Because I feel like Turmoil is less common than Order in most multiplayer games. But maybe I'm wrong.
It's less common than Order. Most people just will take skills.
And because I'm not used to recruiting them, I don't know the res or rec off the top of my head. So if you have Turmoil and you're recruiting them, are you really able to math them to at least even rating numbers? I'm not sure. But the 2 forms is appealing.
They're not an efficient raider. They're for laying the beat down. They're really for counter raiding, which is a very niche and goofy thing to say. But if your opponent is running around with like raiders, and then you run into them with something that hits for like 6 attacks a square, and they like chaos power up to 14 strength or some shit, then you can just really demolish a lot of things while like they just pop you to your second form and then you're fucking ethereal.
I would unironically have to like test it more, but it sounds on paper not bad, but it might be dog. I'm not sure. The thing, so if people don't know how chaos power works, we should probably point this out. You don't necessarily need Turmoil in order to go up the chaos power. So every 15 points is 1 point of chaos power. So even if you're in Order 3, you just need 90 points of unrest in the province to be chaos power 3. Because it's 15 per.
Yeah.
Right, and the Order would counteract it.
So I know I've been a bit missing for one of this podcast, but I've actually used Ko-Oni in a game semi-recently, running Turmoil 3. And I do think, and sorry if you've gone over this, but ultimately the biggest harm towards their effectiveness and usefulness is just the fact that not only are caves rare, but the province's income and rec points don't lend themselves well to recruiting indies. It puts you in a difficult situation.
That is true. And I will bring up this one, or on that, it really fucks over the Lavaborn. Cave provinces are typically low res, like they're low pop provinces, so they have higher res in theory, but in practice not that high res because they're lower pop, and they have usually terrible rec points. So when you end up with something like the Lavaborn, who is 20 gold and I believe a fair amount of resources and rec points, you can basically not recruit any of them.
It's like Heavy Cav.
Well, now, except you unironically can't recruit them.
Yeah.
And I think one entity who's in an even worse position for that is Pale Ones.
Oh yeah,
absolutely useful for the siege strength, I think.
And you could get like 3 of them a turn at
but
best.
They're much higher on recruitment point cost than you would expect for the gold cost.
I would argue that Pale Ones have more use than Lavaborn because they have that utility of siege strength and they're not a lot of gold. But yeah, they do take a while to make, and you're probably not going to be forwarding like your cave province first or even second most of the time.
I really want to like Lavaborn because they are a recruitable fire aura for nations that may not have fire aura or fire damage, or like they're a heat aura, sorry. Recruitable heat aura for nations that may not have it. So in theory, that's like a really good capability get. But you're just never going to have enough of them, and they're 20 gold, so they're like the Abyssian problem, but they're worse than Abyssians, so it's just like, yeah.
There might be some weird tech you could do with the commanders. I kind of feel like the Lavaborn indie type, some of the mods have made it so when you find Lavaborn, you actually get an F1. And I think Ilwinter should take inspiration from that and make that it would be the second Fire 1 indie you could find. And I think that would be a good change for the game in general. But that's my opinion. There might be unique uses with the commander, unironically, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I mean, it's just when you script a heat aura, you know. It's like
yeah, but if you're doing like fatigue play, you could like in theory use it, or maybe you could buff it if you're giving him items, and because he is an Abyssian, so if you give him protection, he probably goes up pretty high. And then him holding an item probably isn't the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes with fire res, so bark skin on him is basically free. So like,
yeah. Moving along. What about some of the more common ones? You know, we talked about the utility of the Pale Ones with seed strength. Do you guys ever build cavemen?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't just build them for seed strength, though.
I think cavemen are an underrated indie. I think the best thing about Caveman is the Caveman Champion, who is a cheaper than normal commander. So if he's holding any of your weird items,
yes.
If he's holding any of your
champion with a GSS,
he's 35 gold. He's not bad. He comes with FR and cold or fire resist and cold res, so he's not too bad. And the Caveman, they can hit harder than most indies, and they're not too bad to mass, but they are 20 gold per one. They're an interesting one. I would say in general they're shit, but they do have use cases.
I really like cavemen because in the really like late game, when you run into flames from the sky murdering wintertime, and every time you go into the battle, you get 1,000,000 buffs on you, and you really just care about like HP and damage. Then all of a sudden, cavemen get really good because they're siege chaff. They don't give a shit about like flames from the sky or murdering winter or a lot of the wipes. They have those resists built in. So when it gets to like the ultra late game, I really like having them. You can also recruit them for damage earlier, but you will rarely be lacking that damage, so I rarely do it. Caveman Champion, also amazing. Like, just...
Dude, give that
if
man
you
a
wanna-
GSS.
Yeah, if you want to give him a GSS and then have him hit for a bunch of damage, it's very funny. Like, you could give him armor, but that's almost overgearing him. Just give him a stick and buff him and send him in to hit the enemy.
The beat stick, man.
Yeah.
I believe he's 37 AP slashing with the GS. You might make them further resistances early if you're running, like, let's say it's early age and you're running to Abyssia or Niflheim or somebody. They don't care about those auras, do they?
No.
So if you're struggling with that, Caveman is your best friend.
I mean, if someone's
Oh.
an idiot and has blessed Nifl Giants up, and then they attack once per round with one attack, and then you just have cavemen who do 1,000,000 damage and have gold res, then yeah, absolutely. Recruit 6 cavemen per Nifl Giant and swamp them.
I actually really hard disagree with that point. That actually kind of triggers me. I think when you're fighting these nations, or even when you're using clouds, you do not need to have res in order to fight these kind of things. Just have a militia or someone else to sit there while you beat the shit out of whatever stupid aura thing is there. Because generally aura sacreds or aura things in general have bad square clearing abilities, so there's no reason why you can't just have someone else sit there while you kill that thing. I don't like that at all, personally.
You try and do that in melee, and they'll put you to sleep.
No.
Yeah, and do you care if your trash is asleep? I don't.
Counter
What
point.
are you gonna kill them
The
then?
caveman does something like 20 damage. So unless you have like your guys are already doing lots and lots of damage, the caveman is going to be better at killing giants than just like fucking.
It's just more efficient.
Yeah.
You say that, but like I've ran 5 cold resist with sacreds, and that's all that cavemen have, and you will absolutely fall asleep versus a Nifl giant in particular. So I don't like it versus even Sniffle giants, because they're just gonna fall asleep like every other unit.
I'm just gonna have to test cavemen versus Sniffle giants and upload it to YouTube when I'm right.
Well, Nifl Giants in particular have like the strongest cold aura as well, so it's
yeah. Well,
Who else would bring a cold aura is the real question.
you named
Vetiheim?
NEA to recruit them. That's why.
But you wouldn't run cavemen to Veti because they just get chopped up.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
Sag.
True,
Yeah.
You would not.
How about the
That's the only reason
Troglodytes?
Pretty funny sometimes, but I don't know how good they are. I think
are-
they have more than anybody else we've talked about. It's hard to recruit them, I think, because of the being in caves.
They're 50 gold. They are way overpriced.
40.
40?
40 gold.
Ah, I'm wrong. Still overpriced. But it kind of sucks that like when you get events or Trog provinces, Ilwinter will just throw like a dozen or like 20 of them at you, and then you're like, oh, what if I want 20 of these? Well, that's 2,000 fucking gold, sir. Like,
yeah, exactly. It's so disproportionate to the event.
so when you see them kick your ass in game, which is normally your cue to be like, oh, maybe I should consider this. It's like, no, you can't afford that shit. No, they just independents and event trogs will just have way more than any player will be able to reasonably recruit, compared to what other players have.
Yeah, the indies can raid you with it, but you can't raid other people with it.
Yeah, very
Well,
triggering.
nice to PD dump with.
True,
Right, so-
with Trogs. Caveman
Yes, with
PD
Trogs.
sucks anus. You get like 1 per 3 gold. It just
It's
sucks.
1 per 3 points. I do think Troglodytes have utility, like I mentioned earlier with elephants. I think they're in the same boat, but they do definitely have a recruitment problem being a cave indie. But niche uses, kind of like the elephant, is how I would categorize them. But they are a trampler, and yeah, they have basically all the points of what I mentioned with elephants before.
Ilwinter, please make the Trog Lord recruitable on the indies, please.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking of this entire time.
What about
Can we get
Zotz?
to the? Can we get to the?
Okay.
Good, yeah, I was gonna say the good cave.
Yeah, the 2 really good cave recruits, I believe that Zotz as the mage are absolutely... They break you into Death 1 outside of your Amazons, which we'll get to later. They're really good, and some people use them for like gem carrying and other dumb crap. I'm not really the biggest fan of recruiting a Zot just for that. But they break you into that.
I mean,
It's a flying chassis.
They
It's not
break you
bad.
into death, and once you have them around, you can just use them for whatever you need. A flying, stealthy, million map move dipshit, right?
I'll use it while you're waiting. You put a bunch of research boosters on it. It researches. It's stealthy. Like it's just a really solid chassis.
Yeah.
You can't use the Zot mage with the units to raid because he only has 10 leadership. But I would say
You
the
put
Zots
a
themselves
slap
are
an
decent.
amulet of the dead on that guy.
That's-
He will raid for you.
Wait.
Wait, no.
What?
That's,
No. The
no.
Zot commander has a D1, Rob.
Yeah, he's
So
D1.
you-
That's why it says
You
Death
could, you got 2 or 3 of them will raid though. Just like you could just have a couple of them raid provinces by just casting it.
Well, you could, but they're gonna fatigue out.
And if you
They're
have
Pokemon.
if you have like actual stealthy leadership laying around, then the actual Zot troops. Actually, the Zot troops are, I will say,
Underrated.
good.
Yeah, they're viable as
They're
They're
raiders.
okay. Yeah.
They're really good raiders.
It's
when
not,
you're not
they're
predicting
like
them
not a
everywhere.
good dude, but like having flying disruption in an army when the enemy doesn't expect it is like so strong because no one is gonna expect you if you're like I don't know, like fucking Marignon,
Niflheim.
right? Like some bink bonk burtle dirtle fucking human. No one's going to expect some bats to like instantly fly to their mage line like turn 1 and just bait enemy cloud spells into their own mage line and cause it just a hideous mess.
Yeah, you're really underrating the Zot. They're one of 2 recruitable flyers in the game. So you have
Indie
Zots
flyers.
and
They're generic.
yeah, of the indie generic flyer.
And then Bakemono Show, how about them?
Oh, very good.
Very good.
Kick major ass. Better as a Highland recruit than a cave recruit, I believe, because that's how that recruiting works. But they are. I don't think we need to convince anyone on this. They are 6 per square. They are cheap as hell. They cost absolutely no resurrect. They raid very, very good. And if you can actually get
Also
them to sit
stealthy?
still, they can buff very good.
Also stealthy.
Also stealthy.
Well, that's the main sell of them. They're a stealthy raider, and they come with an indie commander who's stealthy and has 40.
Yes.
Yeah, they're super good. I would highly recommend recruiting Bakemono for raiding, especially if your nation does not have stealth raiding. It is an option of getting that utility that sometimes you do not have nationally, and you should absolutely be using. But better to make them on a highland if you random that than the cave.
There's not going to be a natural stop to this episode because we went quite long on it. So I'm splitting it up into 2 episodes, and that's it for today's when we covered the generic human indies and the many wonderful cave recruit indies. Next time we're going to be covering tribes, barbs, amazons, and a lot of the rarer and goofier types. This has been your All Stats No Res podcast with HP Munchcraft, Articulatimus, aka Charlie, Sauron, Ravsier, and Darkwolf. And see you next week for the part 2.